in a fishbowl. And now the weather for tonight. Well, it's snowing outside right now, and it looks like it will continue. Now back to music for your late night listening enjoyment. I wonder how those radio guys tell the weather. Oh, they probably just look out the window. Studios have windows? I thought they were inside a building so that they'd be soundproof. Oh, no, not all of them. Why, some have big picture windows, double-plated for the sound, and then they can look out on the whole town. Some are up high and some are on the ground so they can see everything. But can't people look in too? Well, sure they can, and watch the announcers. That must be creepy for the DJs. I mean, people staring in at them through the glass. It'd be like them being in a fishbowl. Coming to you from the grounds of the famous Dick's Cafe in scenic downtown St. George, Utah, this is KDXU, 1450 on your radio dial. Many of you may not remember this, but I do. I said it often when, as a young man over 43 years ago, I worked in the fishbowl behind the glass at KDXU. I came to work there because on a sunny spring day on the south face of Mount Hope, at the north end of St. George proper, I worked with my father in the yard of the station owners, Mr. and Mrs. Winkleman. Wink for short. Now, Mrs. Wink loved to talk, and she conversed with us as we worked. She was a very self-confident and straightforward woman, speaking her mind, come what may. Now, they owned the only radio station in Washington County, and a hobby of hers was to take young men like myself under her wing and to teach them to work in radio, to save money, and then to venture out into the world to be missionaries for their church, scholars, business people of note. I was 14, and she suggested that I come to work for her when I turned 16. But first I must come to the station after school and train, which meant to get voice coaching from her, and lessons from the announcers, and to study for the FCC exam. You had to have a broadcast license. I received my radio telephone operator's license 2 years later, after taking the exam in Los Angeles. Then I sat behind the big picture window, looking out onto the parking lot of Dick's Cafe. This was scary. Why, the microphone was in front of me, Mrs. Wink was behind me to my right, Jim Copley, the head announcer, behind me to my left, and then all those dials, turntables full of records, tape recorders, more dials, gadgets, knobs, clocks, lights, and the hidden audience out there somewhere. Go ahead, you're on. To the announcer's right was a picture window to the outside. To the front, behind the counter and the control board, was the door and another large window, and to the left, another picture window to Studio B. Windows everywhere you could see. Passers-by would come and watch a guy as he worked. Children would watch with their noses pressed against the window. Of course, the announcer could look back. On display to the world, though, it made you feel like you were in a fishbowl. Often, too, you were alone, as a fish, seen out into the world, but not being a part of it. People would call in for requests, and they'd begin to think that they were the DJ's best friend. Sometimes things were hoppin', and there was a frenzied pace, especially when only one man was running the place. Why, there was the announcing to do, doing the logs, finding requests, preparing news and weathercasts and releases, queuing tape machines that sent tape sometimes flying everywhere, needing to go to the bathroom, answering the telephone, queuing and playing records, trying to get your homework in if you had a chance. All of these things and more would require one's attention, and often at the same time, when that happened, oh my, what a madhouse. Some things are serious at a radio station, but you know, when the silence, boredom, and aloneness, and even the hecticness work on one's mind, it breeds the pranks that many DJs play. Well, the station ownership changed, and new men came to work. The sons, two of them, of the owner, came to work too. Well, one evening the older one thought that some LP public surface records and some old 45s would make wonderful frisbees. So he'd step to the front door and launch them northward across the street to the motel on the other side. A good fling, and they would crash into the flower beds, or better yet, hit atop the roof. The fun was in seeing the clerk from the motel come running out to see what had hit the building. After he returned inside, another LP or 45 would be flung and go flying in that direction. Well, now to my knowledge, the motel owners nor the station owners ever learned what happened. The interesting note on this, 20 plus years later, while I was painting and roofing for that motel, I found a piece of one of those records on the office roof. One guy, while previewing records one day, didn't like the side one of a 45, so he stapled it, remarking that that side couldn't be played. Well, side 2 couldn't be played either. The whole record was destroyed. Another way they did records is they'd listen to them. If they didn't like them, they would file them, throwing them into the corner where they'd hit on the wall and then would fall down into the garbage can, breaking. Their filing system for what they didn't like. If we had something we wanted to play that wasn't in the station library, we'd bring our own records in. I got the brunt of some of these pranks that they pulled. At closing time, we read a special notice about station ownership, the operating frequency, wattage, etc. It was a very official and serious affair with the strains of the national anthem playing in the background. Now, one night I had begun to read this over the air, and I glanced to my left to see what the tap on the window of Studio V was about. Larry's face was grotesquely pushed against the glass, his eyes crossed, thumbs in his ears, and fingers wagging. I don't know what you would have done, but I erupted into laughter. Unable to quench the laughter, I shut the microphone down and, allowing the national anthem to close the day on its own, very glad that neither the owners nor the FCC were listening. And what about the window and the weather? Well, the thermometer was on the outside of the window in the shade. I'd look out for that reading and then give my take on the current condition. Oh, it's snowing. Now that was easy to observe, and if it wasn't in the forecast, that was good, because being in a studio with no windows, that would have been very difficult, and we really would have looked foolish predicting the opposite of what really was actually occurring. That happens often in weather forecasts. Even though people would sometimes gawk at us, and we'd feel like a trapped fish, and even though coworkers pulled pranks, working in a fishbowl had its advantages with weather forecasting, and it could be a lot of fun. And that's the way it was over 43 years ago at KDXU.